I'm going to dive into today's conversation with Jamie Gotts. Jamie is one of Oneday's longest serving entrepreneurs in residence. His career began at Crest, managing over 2,000 B2B customers, then moved into Fintech, so completely different industry transition, securing multi-million pound deals, pursuing his passion for early stage tech. Jamie then co-founded the Potluck Club and advised startups. His ventures include Shepherd, a B2B SaaS product, and launching the retail brand Holiday in South Africa. Jamie, welcome. All right, so I need to just double check. Crest is the leather business, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. Tell us a bit more about Crest, how you got into the world of leather, and then we'll move into how you
Mm.
transitioned from the world of leather production into startup land, because pretty damn different.
Yeah, and to be honest, firstly, thank you, Steph. Thank you for having me. It's really cool to be here and get to, yeah, I guess talk a bit about my journey. I never really reflect on it too much, so it's super cool to be here. Um, I guess that first opportunity for me at Crest was super arbitrary, and I never ever in a million years thought I'd be working in leather manufacturing or leather production, but there I was. And so the way I got into that, so I sort of grew up in South Africa, studied here, and we have what in the UK you would call a barbecue. We have a braai, the equivalent. And I was at a braai with a few family friends, and I just come back from a bit of traveling, and they had heard that I'm looking for an opportunity. I had a few things lined up in South Africa, but they then sort of mentioned, by chance that actually there's something that might be on the table in the UK, which was a sort of growth business development role for a leather manufacturing business called Crest. And I had absolutely no idea what this company did, no clue like how leather was manufactured or produced or sold, who the customers were. I had no clue. Had one phone call with the MD at Crest and sort of had my ticket booked. And that was just a really cool opportunity for me to leave South Africa. I didn't need it because fortunately I've got a German passport. But it was a sort of, in a way, a forced function for me to be like, hey, I've got an opportunity. I don't have to land and then try and find an income, basically. And so that's what I did. I moved to the UK, stayed with my aunt, stayed on friends' couches until I, found a place of my own and worked for this company where essentially I was managing, it was probably about 2,200, 2,300 clients in the south of the UK and a little bit in Europe. So I
Wow.
spent literally like 4 out of 5 working days every week just traveling from client to client, staying in hotels. And I always thought, like, growing up, oh, you get to stay in hotels, you get your own car, you get all of this. And to be honest, it wears off very quickly. And
Yeah.
you just want to be at home, not eating like a restaurant meal. You just want to be at home in your own bed. But that's what I did for, I think it was just shy of 2 years. And it was a great experience. It got me to the UK, and that's where my career sort of really took off for me.
Amazing, exciting. All right, well, let's dive into that. So, talk us through that transition and how your career took off at this point in the story.
Yeah, so from there, I felt like I wanted to do. I loved my role at Crest, and the people around me were amazing. The clients were amazing, but I wanted to. I felt like I had plateaued a little bit in terms of my learning, and I wanted to expand on that a little bit. And so I figured I had sort of studied business and finance and economics and that sort of thing, but in a very general way, I'd studied those things. Um, and a lot of the people around me, my friends, my circle, were in finance, maybe in like the audit sector or in the thick of things in finance for like a hedge fund or an asset manager. And that always intrigued me. And so I then got an opportunity in fintech for a company called WTax. And it's all in the world of tax. It sounds very unsexy, but looking back, it's actually a really, really interesting space. There's so much disruption going on, just as you can imagine. It's really archaic. And so, yeah, I mean, we were helping asset managers, pension funds, high net worth individuals, those sorts of players in the finance industry recover portions of their tax that were essentially just being discarded and forgotten
Yeah.
about.
Can I just
Um,
double check what year was
mm,
this?
Gosh, that was 2015 or 2016. I can't quite
Yeah,
remember.
yeah. Okay. The reason I asked that
Yeah.
question is because of all of these boring businesses that were getting disrupted around the same
Mm,
kind of time. So you mentioned tax, things like insurance, mortgages. What else comes to mind? All of these old, boring, stuffy, like unexciting
mm,
industry were getting, yeah, disrupted. And all of these cool challenger brands were coming out of the woodwork. You've got Habito in the mortgage landscape, at least here in the UK. You've obviously, I mean, Monzo for fintech, you know, classic.
mm.
You've got all the, and then there was like Pluto, which was like a travel insurance one, and like all of a sudden these really cool brands and things were coming up. So you joined the WTax firm at this point, and then
Yeah.
what from that point onwards?
So from there, we were basically, as you said, it's a very unsexy industry, and it's purely because, I mean, taxes, it's super complicated and it's forever moving and changing, and trying to keep up is super difficult. But if you're willing to get your hands dirty and actually understand it and understand like what role it plays, there's a lot of money to be made, a lot of, innovation to be had. Um,
Mm.
and so, I was thrown into the deep end, I guess, in quite a big way, where I was part of a tiny team. I think I was the third person in the UK team. And we were figuring it out, like a lot of the time. Honestly,
Yeah.
we knew how to service certain clients because of the way they ran things. But then, for example, we had never ever sold into a pension fund, and the pension fund market is enormous. And so we just had to, try and book
Work
meetings with
out.
pension funds. Yeah, and just try and, like, extract information from them to figure out like what it is we're doing, um, and how we can sort of position ourselves to them that is attractive without letting them realize that we actually have no idea what we're up to.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Quite a game. It felt like quite a game, which is really cool.
Creating that perception, the smoke and mirrors. I don't know whereabouts all the founders are in the program who have joined us this evening, but you've got the whole concept of, Wizard of Oz MVP, what you do behind the scenes, behind the curtains. So I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that. Jamie, quick question at this point in your story. What do you think that you took with you from your experience at Crest? I'm thinking especially on the sales side of things. You mentioned you had to travel so much and had all these accounts that you were managing. What were some of the core strengths, the skill set, the experience that really benefited you at this next stage, transitioning into the world of fintech startup?
I think one thing that I really learned was that it's not enough to just establish that initial relationship. And I learned that really quickly, and learned that you really had to nurture those. So, you know,
Mm.
obviously you want, there's something that needs to be transacted, which, at the end of the day. But um, I think what I learned was that there's a lot of merit in sort of having a longer term view on how to build that relationship, and expecting something that to come eventually, but it doesn't have to come immediately. And so, that's what I took into my role in fintech. Was we found a lot of partnerships that really didn't pay any dividends early on, but
Mm.
10, 12, 18 months down the line, these partnerships were pulling through for us like you cannot believe.
So, how do you reconcile that with the practicalities of a runway with a deadline? If there's a relationship that needs to be nurtured and you take that long term view, which I get makes sense, but if that's not going to pay dividends until 18 months down the line, but we've got
Mm.
like 3 to 6 months to live and we need like something to happen, how do you manage to, yeah, reconcile that?
Mm. It's a complete balancing act, right? Like, I think that you really have to be super intentional about how you split your time. What is the low hanging fruit? Like, go for it. Go for that low hanging fruit. If you can find a customer that you know is gonna convert, even if it's a cousin or a family member or a friend or whatever it is, like, convert them, right? Like, don't hesitate. It's low hanging fruit. Um, but I think there are opportunities that can still be tapped into, um, where you're not overcapitalizing all your time into that opportunity and hoping and praying that something's going to come out of it. So I think a lot of it is trusting your gut, and actually, like, having a plan. Okay, I'm going to divvy up my time, maybe 15% on those big partnerships that might, like, change our entire company forever. But then make sure that you're going after the bread and butter, maybe the smaller deals that maybe aren't as flashy and aren't as exciting. Those are the ones that keep the lights on. So I think it's really trying to understand and strike the balance of like, how should you divvy up your time based on, sort of low effort, high impact, like what is going to convert, and identifying the low hanging fruit and the longer term.
That makes a ton of sense, especially to a marketer by trade and someone who used to run her own marketing agency. I definitely see the parallels with, the nurture, the demand generation, the warming up along the pipeline, the funnel. So I'd love to get your views on marketing, especially through that kind of sales lens. What I just want to comment on really quickly is I'm so glad that you mentioned like 15%. I know that's obviously, a rough number out of thin air, but I do think people need to latch on to like really clear examples of that, to be like, okay, how do I actually translate these concepts that we can talk about in an interview setting like this? How can that actually translate to what my day or my week looks like? So the fact that you've said, maybe put a little bit of your time, energy, a day, 15%, whatever that looks like, to those bigger bets, those longer term goals, especially if it's early days, but then the rest, obviously you still need to keep the lights on. Just before we move on, are there any other like frameworks, any other rules that you live by around that kind of balancing act between like getting sales, converting the low hanging fruit versus that longer term? Because I just feel like it's really easy to waste a lot of time, and it's really hard to know if something's going to pay off or not. So I would just love to hear if there's anything else from you on that.
I think, and this is probably touching on my experience with my most recent company, Shepherd. We tested a ton, and we tried to go like the quantity route. We tried to go volumes and try and reach everybody. And just for context, because it is quite applicable, for context, it's a B2B software that helps run more productive meetings. And so, at first glance, it applies to anybody who has a remote meeting. So we were like, well, let's try that shotgun approach. Let's try and, oh, there's celebration. I think that was my hands that.
No, that was my reaction. I didn't want to cut you off, but that was my reaction to you saying, well, every time you do it, I'm going to hit the emoji button, make you think that you're a magician, Jamie.
I would have.
No, that's my reaction, because I think everyone wants more efficient meetings. So it was just on that one line there. Sorry, carry on.
No, and it's just around like, we tried the quantity route, just, shotgun, trying to just get absolutely any deal through the door. And it just didn't really work. And I ended up wasting a lot of time. And I went through a period where I was justifying my time being spent there. It was probably more than 15%, but it was a case of justifying my time being spent there because it's going to pay off. It has to pay off because we're casting such a wide net. But in reality, that isn't what happened. So that was quite a tough learning for me, where I would way prefer to be more intentional about my approach to whoever you're looking to influence as a decision maker. So, if you're looking to form a partnership or, convert a client, like, be super intentional. Rather send like 5 of them a day, but they're hyper tailored and personalized to that person or that company. Because I think people respond to that. And I'm sure, Steph, that like, as a founder, you get so much inbound, and if you're trying to convert to a business owner, you're going to get lost in the noise. So being intentional, you can stand out a little bit more than a lot of the others.
I love that. I definitely want to underscore that. And I would just add to our listeners as well that the exact same applies if you're fundraising. The same strategy to investors. I know that it's already so much hard work, whether you've got a co-founder or if you're a solo founder, it's even worse because there's so much on your shoulders. I get and I empathize with all of that. But the reality is, similar to you saying, founders get lots of inbound, investors get even more. And if you haven't looked at their thesis, their areas of focus, the rest of their portfolio, they are just going to ignore you. So I love what you say there with like, you're better off just doing like 5 hyper-personalized, targeted emails rather than just that scattergun approach, just, blanketing everyone. So let's speed up the story. So you've already mentioned Shepherd, great name, great value proposition. When did you start Shepherd?
So we started Shepherd pretty much shortly after the pandemic was like a global thing. Like after everybody sort of realized we're going to have to be working from home and that sort of thing. I it was quite a controversial one for me personally because pandemic hits, we all sort of bound to our four walls. I was in London at the time, so a tiny apartment, um, and I had actually just before sort of we were told all working from home. I'd accepted a role at a cloud kitchen company in the UK. They were, I think, Series A at the time, and I was taking up a head of operations role, and it was a strict operations, which that's not really my personality, which is partly why I ended up not taking it. But I just felt like there was so much opportunity with the pandemic. I was trying to figure out like how can what can I do to solve a problem, even the tiniest little problem, and that'll be fun, right? I also just wanted it to be enjoyable and a problem that I was experiencing, and so I ended up turning that job down. I thought I was nuts. Maybe I was nuts. I don't know. I'll never know. But yeah, I turned that down to start my own thing, and it evolved from like a number of different ideas in a number of different industries. But eventually, I joined an accelerator program, moved to Norway, to Oslo, with my wife, and yeah, met a whole bunch of new people. Met my co-founder at the program, and we did a bunch of industry sprints, which was super cool. So corporates came in with a number of different problem statements, and we were put into random teams, and we were told, come up with a solution, pitch it back to us that solves for a specific problem that we've presented. And so we did a couple of those sprints together. Some went terribly, others went really, really well. But fundamentally, we just realized that we could work super well together. And so normally in the program, the structure, you would find your idea and then find your co-founder. But for me,
By
that
the way,
didn't make. Yeah.
I'm sorry to just jump just before you go any further. You've mentioned the program a couple of times. I think just for our listeners, you're referring to Antler, which is
To
the
Antler.
global VC. They're very famous for their entrepreneur residencies. So I just wanted to shout out Antler. Sorry for interrupting, Jamie. Right. So you're in this
No worries.
program, Oslo, amazing. It's also quite famous for that co-founder matching, right? So if you haven't got
Yeah.
a co-founder,
It's sort of like the earliest investment into individuals, I would say, because you haven't really built much. So I think it's location dependent, but quick sort of overview. It's a 10-week program. You typically join as an individual. You don't have to, but you typically do. Sometimes with an idea or without an idea, and you pitch it back and to an investment committee, which is the VC fund. It's pretty intense. It's very sort of like Shark Tank-esque. And that's where I met my co-founder, and for us that was the biggest thing, is finding that like really, really strong partnership, because we know how delicate those relationships can be. And we were like, cool, we'll just find the idea at a later stage. And that's what we did. We just figured out like, what are the problems? We went through so many, like, are there problems we can solve for in relationships? Like the divorce rates are going through the roof, and with the pandemic, probably going to go even higher. And so like, what can we do? But we settled on Shepherd. A lot of people resonated with it. We spoke to so many people. And yeah, it ended up being a great decision that we've loved working on.
amazing. And I just have to mention, you've reminded me of another one of our Oneday community events, to shout out to the founder of Flam. It was pronounced Flame, but it's with two M's, E. Yeah. That was all around actually the problem that you just described, which was relationships were breaking up, divorces. It's very much a relationship focused app. So give that one a listen. That was super interesting. But back to you, Jamie. What I'm really curious about at this stage in your story is, can you break down for us, let's say like the top 1 to 3 characteristics, signals, traits that your co-founder possessed that made you believe that you were a great co-founding fit before you even came up with the idea?
I think, I mean, the one is like, are you just, fundamentally, are you going to enjoy your time with this person?
Yeah.
And that I'm not going to count that as my answer, but that does need to be like point number one. You really do have to spend your time with this person and enjoy doing it. Otherwise, you're going to resent yourself and that person. But I think, from a business point of view, that I thought was pretty advantageous was, I think his thoroughness. So my co-founder, he was technical. He is technical. He, you know, he likes to slow things down and take a breath and be like, okay, why are we making this decision? Whereas I'm sort of on the opposite end. I want to just run. I want to run through walls. I want to make mistakes. I don't care. I just want to move quickly, and I know that there are flaws in those traits. And so, what I needed for me, my sort of complementary aspect to starting the company was somebody who slowed me down and made me think a little bit more. And yeah, that worked out well. Like we then actually started swapping roles eventually. Like he was just wanting to move, and I was like, whoa, let me pump the brakes.
You both rubbed off on each other.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. And the third one?
Oh, you asked for three. Sorry, I didn't realize. Okay, and the third one, I would say one that is super important is having strong opinions, but having them loosely held.
Yeah.
I think it's really important. You've got to talk with conviction, and you've got to be able to back whatever you're saying and whatever you end up deciding. But you have to have the capacity to be like, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this isn't the best way to go, and consider other options. So that was a big one for me, and we were both very reasonable in decision making, and so that worked out super well for us.
I love that. So just to be fair, I think I asked you top 1 to 3, so don't worry, I think I was just going for gold there. But just to recap for our listeners as well then, so we've got fundamentally, do you just get on with the person? Like, we're all humans at the end of the day. Like, do I enjoy my time with them? Secondly is, do they balance you out in a good way? Is it a good kind of yin yang? Jamie, I relate to you. I'm definitely like move fast and break things. So having someone that like slows me down, puts on the brakes, I totally get that. And thirdly, what was it again? Sorry. This is why I need to recap, because even I forget.
The strong opinions loosely held.
Strong opinions loosely held. So I think part of that is also like you kind of see eye to eye. You've got similar sort of approach fundamentally, and you feel passionately enough about what you're solving, but you're both, I guess, got enough humility to say, actually, maybe I'm wrong. Okay, amazing. So what I'm also really curious about, just sticking with the same theme for a second here, is with the Antler program, just because I've never been through it, I know a lot of incredible founders, yourself included, that have gone through the program. Do they give you like psychometrics or assessments? Are there any other like specific co-founder matching tools that they do at Antler?
A lot of it is the practical sprints. So they really do observe. They literally just like walk around and they're observing everything without the founders actually realizing. And then there's an element of like, I was very proactive in the program. So I would go to Antler and say like, listen, I would love to work with that person in the next sprint for these reasons. And of course, it's in their best interest because they want the best team. And if I think it might be a great fit, they're like, cool, that's a hunch. Let's follow that. Yeah, and I guess like one thing that maybe it's jumping the gun a little bit, but one thing that my co-founder and I did, and we took very seriously, and I would really recommend people, who are looking to form a team to go through this exercise, which is, it's almost like, what did we call it? We called it a track out scorecard. You can call it whatever you'd like, but it's basically like, are we on the same page? Is the purpose of this exercise. And so, roughly speaking, it was an Excel spreadsheet, and I'm more than happy to, send a template out to whoever would like one, but, and they can add to it. But it's an Excel spreadsheet of like, call it 50 different questions, ranging from like, how do you, what are your salary expectations after funding? What, like how many hours a day are you going to work? What are your thoughts on weekends? Do we take weekends? How many days holiday? And then it moves into other things like, how do you deal with conflict? And it really, like, as an individual makes you really think like, how do I deal with conflict, and how do I want somebody else to deal with conflict? All the way through to like, okay, what is your take on like exiting and selling to a bigger company? What is your take on fundraising? And I'm missing a lot of those the questions in this answer, but it's quite thorough. It really does make you think, and you do the exercise completely separately. And then we came and sat together from about 6 p.m. in the evening until probably like 2 o'clock in the morning, just like grilling each other, but in a very kind way. Like, why do you think working 16-hour days is feasible. And there were certain things that maybe we over or underestimated, but it was a really great exercise to be like, okay, at the end of it, we're a great fit. And if there were some things that we weren't perfectly aligned on, we'd revisit that and be like, okay, what's going on here? Like, do you really feel like this? Why do you feel like this? This is how I feel. And, just have like a very safe space to discuss our compatibility, essentially.
I absolutely love that, Jamie. I just put in the chat, I for one would definitely like to get a copy of that template. If anyone else would as well, just pop like an emoji or something in the chat for that. The one of the things that I love about it as well is not only are those questions thorough, to your point, but do you know what? I genuinely believe that they force very obvious basic questions that I feel like a lot of us would just, I don't know whether it's embarrassment or what actually kind of gets in the way, but I feel like a lot of us like just don't even bother asking those basics, like how many hours of a day do you expect to work? How do you, it's kind of, it's one of those things that just does need to be prompted by an external party or an Excel or something like, right, we've got these questions to answer. There's something awkward about, it's not normalized to ask those sort of really basic questions to each other, is it? So
Completely. Yeah.
I love that. Okay, so let's move things along then. I was really curious to hear about your experience, so thank you so much for answering a bit about that. Let's move on to the investment side of things. So with Antler, again, I don't know the ins and outs, but just because they're obviously the first, I presume they have a stake in the business and they give you a bit of funding, right, to get you off on your way.
That's correct. Yeah.
So how much typically, how much did you get from Antler?
So
and then
I know that the terms have changed in general. I think they've probably changed like even since I've left there, but I know that location specific, they've got their own terms. So it's difficult to speak on all of the locations' behalf, but I think for us, I mean, give or take, it was like $120,000 or something like that for 10% off the top of my head. There is a sort of what do they call it? A program fee where you take some of that funding. So your valuation, your pre-money valuation is set, and then they claw back some funding as a program fee. But what I will say is that the terms aren't great, and so I think I would think about that very carefully, depending on what you're looking to accomplish. But what it does do, it de-risks a huge amount at the beginning, and that's where, of course, that's where the risk is highest, and it slowly but surely sort of diminishes as you go. And so I think I would highly recommend it to a first-time founder, maybe a second-time founder, but I think it's a great way to de-risk the beginning of starting a company. I think what is really important to note, and a lot of people don't know this, is that I don't think the biggest sort of benefit of Antler is the money at all. The money is actually probably like third or fourth on the list, maybe lower. But I think like the number one thing that is super difficult to find if you're not in an organized program is having the same people that are at a similar stage in their life or in their career. They're looking to do something, and having quit their jobs, they are all in pretty much. Having them all in the same room and people who are complementary. That is super, super rare to have. And that was, by far and away, like the most valuable thing that I was exposed to, was just having complementary people to work with.
Yeah, amazing. And hopefully our founders are experiencing that on the Oneday program as well, the access to community and everything. So Ant got you off the ground. What was the next step in your story there from that initial like 120K, whatever it was, that seed or pre-seed funding from Antler? Did you then go out to other VCs to get more venture capital investment for Shepherd?
Yeah, so we knew that funding wasn't going to last us very long. We were very sort of conservative with our spending and the money that we were individually pulling from the funding, and but we knew that we had to start fundraising pretty quickly. I think like because the program is so short, 10 weeks. In fact, it's shorter than that. It's about 5 or 6 weeks that we had our idea that we were working on. It's not a lot of time to like validate properly, and so we almost wanted to revalidate a couple of things to make sure that we were solving for the right thing, especially in such a broad market that I mean, I don't think you have to be a rocket scientist to come up with the idea that we came up with, right? It's just super timely. Um, it just makes a lot of sense. And so, we really wanted to try and make ours the way people genuinely want it, not the way we think they want it. And so I spent a lot of time revalidating and just discovering sort of insights basically from customers. From there, we were very fortunate enough to get a decent grant from the Norwegian government of about, I think it was $150,000. And that money really helped us. It just bought us a lot more time to breathe and be like, okay, now we need to build our team, which is obviously a huge step for us. From there, then we raised a couple of like smaller rounds of angel funding. So we have about 11 or 12 Norwegian angel investors. Then we've got some in South Africa and some in the UK, all founders, people who are very passionate about the space. And that was great for us because we had a lot of resources that we can draw on where we had a lot of blind spots, whether it's product management or marketing or user experience design, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Love that. And I think that's another benefit to highlight to our listeners as well, which is particularly, I guess, VCs, they're trying harder now with the added value piece, but with angels, because it's more of that individual, the angel investors, you've got that added benefit beyond just the cash that they bring on to the table. They've got things like the expertise you just mentioned, maybe tapping into their networks. There are all of those other really valuable benefits. So just to fact check, was it mainly angels and grants how you got further investment, or were there any other VCs in the mix for you at Shepherd?
So we, of course, that was actually quite an interesting time for us. So we were raising our next round of funding and super far down the line with a bunch of VCs. And this was, oh gosh, I can't actually remember when it was exactly, maybe like 2 years ago, basically when there was the big sort of tech crash and Y Combinator circulated that email, that time. We were literally, that was the worst timing for us, unfortunately. That week we were waiting for yes or no decisions from like 4 or 5 really, really great VCs. And that email went around and we thought maybe we'd still get in there, even just like with 2 of them. But no, like everybody said that they were still deploying, but they weren't. And so, yeah, that was a super, super tough time for us. We had to lay off a bunch of our team. We obviously cut our own salaries to zero. It was very difficult after getting the momentum we had. We had just been voted #1 on Product Hunt. And so a lot going for us. And then that happens. We sort of felt like it was a bit of a kick in the teeth. But, you roll with the punches.
Yeah, absolutely. My separate podcast is called Strategy and Strategy, and this sounds exactly like the sort of story on that as well. Because this isn't about the doom and gloom. It's not about how awful, how stressful it is to be a founder, although obviously that can be true. But it is exactly to your point. It's shining a light on the fact that one day you're on top of the world. You're #1 on Product Hunt, and then 24 hours later, all the money that you're expecting to come in is no longer, and you've got to lay off your team, which is one of the worst things that you have to go through as a founder as well, like letting people go. It's so painful. So really sorry to hear that you went through that, Jamie, but I think hopefully it's reassuring to know that it was that crazy time and there was all of this crazy stuff happening in the market. So that sort of takes the sting out of it. And last question for me, because I know that we're getting some questions coming in through the chat. If anyone would still like to ask Jamie anything, then start typing and pop it in the chat now. While I ask you the last question, Jamie, as the longest serving, or one of the longest serving mentors here at Oneday, plus your roles as advisor, being a founder yourself, what would you say is the top, if you can pick only one, what's the top mistake that you think early stage entrepreneurs make?
Oh my gosh, there's so many, and I've made like 90% of them. Wow, I think
I'll give you a second. I mean, if it helps jog your memory, this is one that you had a few thoughts on. So I think something to do with speed, maybe.
Yeah. So I think that is probably the looking back on our journey, and I know that, for me, speed is everything. And it really is. Like, looking back, it really is. And sometimes I think I compromised a little bit on speed. And so, yeah, I think for me, particularly at the early stages, maybe you can start slowing down once things are stabilizing a little bit. But at the early stages, there's really no substitute for speed. And I just think that as if you can quickly come to terms with, okay, if I move quickly, yes, I'm going to make mistakes. Yes, I'm going to have to do a couple of U-turns here and there. But I think for me, just intuitively, you make far more progress by doing that, even by turning around and starting over in certain areas, than you do just by dawdling and overthinking. Because it's happened to me so many times, and I have compromised on speed before, and you end up literally moving nowhere.
Yeah.
Moving nowhere is worse than moving backwards, in my opinion. So I think for me, there's no substitute for speed. Just do it. Just move forward and be
Yeah.
comfortable with the fact that it's not always going to be the result that you had hoped for, but you just keep moving quickly.
Jamie, you are absolutely preaching to the choir. I find myself giving that piece of advice the most frequently to my cohort, my founders. I don't know if any of you are in the chat with us today, but that is one of, I have to wholeheartedly agree with you on that one. I don't know whether it's likely to be a combination of the fact that both of us like to move fast and break things. So we've already got that as our natural strength personality. But also, again, the most common mistake I've categorically seen is I don't know what, there is a fear that's getting in the way of different people. And it could be whether it's, I think fear of perfectionism is a big one. I think, as long as it's not real and it's not out there, they haven't failed. So as long as
Mm,
it's hypothetical, it's in their mind, it's not, fear of judgment, especially putting something out there. I just have to mention as well something called the spotlight effect, which I think is just so true. Everyone thinks that they are paying more attention to them than they actually are. No one's
completely.
actually,
No one cares.
no one, it's good news and bad news, right? Like, good news is, no, bad news is no one cares. Good news is no one cares. So like, and
Yeah.
I'm the same. I had a deep realization as well last year that not moving, it feels like death to me. It feels like death. Anyway, I
Mm.
love that point. I just wanted to add a few thoughts on that because I obviously feel very passionately about that too. All right, we've got some questions from the audience. So Martha B. Flowers, love your full name. She's asking, what platform or app did you use to help you build the relationships with your clients to retain them and not lose them at some point? Martha, amazing question. Thank you for that one.
Mm. Really good question. And I think everybody's going to have to do that at some point. Like, you'll feel a client slipping, or even if they're not slipping, you have to nurture that relationship. Um, but I think if I had to pinpoint a specific tool that I used, and I still use it, I love it. I use it for a number of different things, but I think I used it for this exact purpose, was to foster that relationship and just like show them that it's me. I'm trying to be personable, and I'm not just a bot, or and so that would be for me, I think, Loom. And so for anybody who doesn't know what Loom is, it's basically like a video recording product that you can either record yourself talking, you can take your face away, the video away, but you can still hear your voice talking, and or you could share your screen while doing all of that. So you could use Loom. It's a Chrome plugin, and you can use it to demonstrate a product. You can use it to give feedback on somebody's website. You can use it for anything. But I think, for me, I used it a lot to do outreach to potential customers, but then also to existing customers. Be like, hey, I see that you're having trouble doing X. This is something that I would recommend you doing. And all of a sudden they're blown away. They're like, that is customer service that I've never seen in my life. Maybe that's also because we're small, right? Like we don't have a massive customer base to serve. And so like we can be personable. But I think what I would suggest is, where you can be personable, do it. Just take that opportunity, because they'll appreciate it so much.
1,000,000%. Thanks for the great question there, Martha. What I would just add to that as well is, I was just chatting to Juan about it earlier as well, actually. So sending voice notes on LinkedIn, that again is game changer. I'm almost like, I almost want to gatekeep it because it's such a good one. But to your point, Jamie, it adds that personality in our world of tech and automations. It shows there's a real person, whether it's seeing you on a Loom video or hearing your voice, it just has that impact. Fantastic. I love that. Daniel, looking back at your career as an entrepreneur, what were your green lights, events or moments that reinforce the notion that you chose the right business idea? Daniel, that's an awesome question. Thank you for that one.
That's a great question. I think, well, maybe I should speak more recently. So I've recently launched a new business in South Africa, and it's in a field that is completely foreign to me. I've never really spent much time working in retail. So it's in retail, and it's ladies' clothing. So for example, like this is an example of one of the products. I don't know if you can see that, but oh, you can't see that.
You've got the
Anyway,
blur. Oh, yeah. Earrings. They
there you
look
go.
gorgeous.
So it's a pair of earrings. The brand is called Holiday, but it's clothing and decor and resort wear, earrings, jewelry, bags, etc. And so, like, I mean, I'm new to all of that. It's an extension of our family business, but you know, I'm teaming up with my sister, and we're just running with it. And we probably about 3 weeks ago, we launched our very first store in a coastal town in South Africa, and the reception was amazing. But I think like the best thing, we've just had a Facebook comment from somebody 2 days ago, and that just blew me away, which was, you know, I don't know who the owner of the store is, but you have brought so much joy to this town. You have brought so much joy to people walking around the street. You know, it was sort of that sentiment, and that for me was like a big moment that I just absolutely loved, and I felt like I'm working on the right thing. That's obviously for this particular business, but I've had many others. And yeah, I think that's why we do this, right? Is for those moments where you're like, man, I'm so happy I'm doing this just because of what that person said, or just because I saw somebody using or wearing our product.
I love that so much. It's so meaningful, isn't it? I feel like it is just those wins or green lights, as you phrased it, Daniel. I love that phrase. They really do remind us of why we started, what we're doing. It's such a high, isn't it? There's like nothing that compares to that. I think also just one thing that comes to mind, Jamie, on that answer there is the saying, you're better off making one person love you than 10 people liking you. So getting those sorts of comments, getting that sort of feedback, it really shows that you're onto something. All right,
Yeah,
amazing.
absolutely.
Thank you for the comment, Martha. Love that. All right, unless anyone's got any more questions, I'm going to move over to quiz time, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see who has been paying attention to Jamie's story. I'm going to pop the link in the chat here, and I'm going to go back to sharing the screen. Hopefully, there should be a QR code up here for you to scan with your phone. If that's easier, I'll give you all a minute or two to fill out the questions. And then Jamie, I'll come to you for the answers and we'll see who's got it right. This is the part, the lift music.
I'm excited. I've never done this quiz before, or I've never observed it.
Well, it's on your own entrepreneurial journey, so hopefully you'll get them right. All right. Well, it's multiple choice, which is good news for everyone, Jamie included, apparently. So, all right. The first question is, what made Jamie go from the world of leather production to startup land? Do you want to go for it, Jamie, in a sentence?
Oh gosh, I'm trying to like recollect like what I said. No, I'm on this. I'm going to fail my own test.
It was so funny.
I guess it was, you know, to try and do something more in line with what I had studied. You know, I hope this is right, but yeah, I had sort of studied like general business and finance, but I wanted to really like sharpen that tool. But I think a big part of that was the pressure I felt from my peers and from like my circle.
Okay, so
Did I fail my own test?
Let's read it out to you and see. Let's see how close this is. So, a friend referred Jamie to a job in leather production during a barbecue, and I decided to take the opportunity to start my career overseas.
I jumped one step ahead. Sorry, I was thinking about the finance side of things. Okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
Oh,
That's
I
okay.
wasn't paying attention.
It's harder on ourselves, isn't it? Next question. If you can pick only one, what would you say is the top mistake that early stage entrepreneurs make?
Lack of speed for me is like the number one mistake.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Reluctance to move quickly. Speed is crucial in the early stages, and compromising on it can hinder progress and reduce excitement. And then we've got a little feedback form for everyone. So please let us know if you enjoyed it. And yeah, that's all from us. Thank you so much to everyone for your questions, your involvement. As always, really hope you enjoyed this discussion and you found a lot of value. You learned something new. Jamie, thank you so much for being our guest with us this evening. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Steph. Thank you so much for having me. It was really, really fun.
Likewise, Jamie. All right, let's keep the conversation going. We've got a community Slack channel, so please pop any more questions or any other thoughts, reflections over there. What were the top things that you took away from this conversation with Jamie this evening? And we'll see you next time.